Stop for a moment and imagine a 9-year-old boy standing backstage, hands shaking, feet fidgeting, trying to convince himself that he belongs among giants. He whispers something to himself. Nobody hears it, nobody notices the tiny spark in his eyes. Nobody knows what he is about to bring to the stage. They only see a child who looks much too young, much too small, and much too quiet to do anything extraordinary. The judges are ready, the audience is restless, and little do they know that in just a few minutes, they will all be on their feet. The story begins long before this audition day. It begins in a quiet neighborhood where a boy named Michael spent most of his afternoons watching old concert videos of the real Michael Jackson. He wasn't just a fan. He was a student soaking in every move, every expression, every note. But more than anything, he paid attention to emotion. He listened to the way pain could transform into art. He understood the way a voice could carry hope, sadness, dreams, and courage all at once. And though he was only 9, he understood it more deeply than some adults do in a lifetime. But life wasn't easy for him. He didn't grow up with fancy studios or voice teachers. He didn't have a stage. He didn't have perfect lighting or professional microphones. What he had was a cracked old mirror in his bedroom, a tiny speaker that barely worked, and a dream that felt too big for a child his age. Every night he would stand there practicing, copying steps, refining notes, imagining himself in front of a massive crowd. And every night he would end with the same whisper, "One day, they will see me." He didn't know how this dream would ever come true. His mother worked long hours. His father was rarely home. Money was tight, they had no connections, no music background, no path into the industry. But the universe works in strange ways. Sometimes it pushes people toward moments they didn't know were coming. For Michael, that moment arrived when a local school event recorded a short clip of him singing and dancing. Someone posted it online. It spread, slowly at first, then suddenly all at once. And eventually, someone from the AGT production team saw it. When the invitation call came, his mother froze. She thought it was a prank. She reread the message over and over. And finally she called Michael to the living room. When she told him, he stared at her with disbelief. The same disbelief that comes when a dream begins to step out of imagination and walk into real life. He hugged her tightly, then ran to the mirror, looked at himself once again, and whispered the same line he had whispered 1,000 times. But this time, it felt different. The days leading up to the audition were filled with excitement and fear. He practiced non-stop, but something strange happened. Every time he practiced the performance exactly like Michael Jackson, it didn't feel right anymore. It felt like he was hiding behind someone else's greatness. And so, one night before the audition, he did something bold. He turned off the speaker. He put away the dance gloves. And he stood completely still. He looked into the mirror and said, "Tonight you sing as you." He didn't know what song to choose. He didn't know what the audience expected. He didn't know whether they wanted a tribute act or a carbon copy of an icon. But he did know one thing. He had a story to tell. Not the story of the superstar. Not the story of the king of pop. His own story. His own pain. His own courage. His own small but powerful truth. The morning of the audition came faster than he wanted. He barely slept. His mother braided his hair gently, whispering that she was proud no matter what happened. She held his hand the entire ride to the venue. At the AGT stage, everything looked massive. The cameras, the lights, the crowds, the echoes of footsteps from other contestants. It was overwhelming, and for a moment he felt a wave of panic crash into him. But then he remembered something his mother always said, "The world is big, but your heart is bigger if you let it be." He nodded to himself and waited. When his turn finally came, he walked onto the stage slowly. His breath was unsteady, his hands were cold. The judges glanced at him with a mix of curiosity and hesitation. Simon leaned forward, Heidi smiled warmly, Howie looked amused, wondering what this little boy could possibly do. Sophia tilted her head, already charmed by his innocence. The audience murmured, whispering guesses. Some expected a cute performance. Some expected a dance imitation. Very few expected anything more than simple entertainment. But Michael had already decided something backstage. He wasn't here to impress them. He was here to tell the truth. One of the judges asked him his name. He answered softly, "Michael." Another judge raised an eyebrow as if expecting the last name. When he said his full name, the audience chuckled lightly because the coincidence felt too perfect. But Michael wasn't trying to be funny. He wasn't trying to be dramatic. He was simply stating who he was. And then came the question that would change everything. What will you be performing for us today? There was silence. The kind of silence that feels like the world is holding its breath. Michael took a moment. He looked at the crowd. He looked at the judges. And then he said something nobody expected. I'll be singing my own story. The audience hushed instantly. Even Simon leaned back, suddenly intrigued. A 9-year-old writing and performing his own story. It sounded unbelievable. But unbelievability is often where great moments begin. The music started. It wasn't a fast beat. It wasn't a pop rhythm. It was a slow, emotional instrumental. Something raw, something almost fragile. And then Michael opened his mouth. The first note was small, trembling, pure, but within seconds it grew stronger, rising through the room like a wave of truth. His tone had an unusual softness, mixed with determination and innocence. His voice didn't sound manufactured or coached. It sounded honest. It carried emotion far beyond his age. It carried a tremor that hinted at struggle, a brightness that hinted at hope, and a courage that only comes from surviving something difficult. His lyrics were simple but powerful. He sang about watching his mother work late, about wanting to help but being too young. He sang about feeling invisible in school, feeling different, feeling like he didn't fit in anywhere except when music wrapped around him like a safe blanket. He sang about loneliness, dreams, and the tiny seed of belief that lights up inside a child who refuses to let sadness become the whole story. He sang about how he learned to be strong, not because he wanted to be, but because life gave him no other option. Halfway through the performance, the audience was no longer just listening. They were feeling. Something in his voice touched something deep in them. Perhaps it reminded them of their own childhood fears. Perhaps it reminded them of their own dreams they never chased. Perhaps it reminded them that pain doesn't belong to adults alone. Even children carry heavy stories. And sometimes they carry them quietly. His voice cracked once, just once, a tiny break in the middle of a difficult note. But instead of ruining the moment, it made it even more real. The entire room inhaled sharply. Even Simon blinked more slowly than usual. And then Michael pushed through the note with a strength nobody expected. He finished the line with a vibrato that felt like a release. A release of fear, a release of pressure, a release of everything he had been holding inside. The last part of the song changed. The music lifted, his voice lifted, his words shifted from sadness to determination. He sang about standing on a stage he once only saw in dreams. He sang about proving to himself that he belonged in the world. He sang about hope. He sang about believing in something even when nobody else does. He sang about how a small child can still make a massive sound if he speaks from his heart. When he reached the final line, he held the last note longer than anyone expected. Not because he wanted to show off. Not because he was trying to impress the judges. He held it because it was the last piece of his story. And he wanted the world to hear it. Really hear it. When the music stopped, the silence was overwhelming. Nobody clapped at first. Nobody spoke. The judges stared at him with wide eyes. The audience froze in awe. The air itself felt suspended, as if time refused to move forward until everyone processed what had just happened. And then it happened. A single person in the crowd stood up. Then another. Then another. And suddenly the entire auditorium rose to its feet in one of the longest standing ovations of the season. The applause thundered through the room. People were wiping their eyes. People were hugging each other. People were cheering the name of a boy who walked in anonymous and walked out unforgettable. Michael looked around with disbelief. He had imagined applause before. But this was different. This was overwhelming. He covered his mouth with his hands. Tears filled his eyes, but he tried to hold them back. He didn't want to cry on stage. But even if he did, nobody would have blamed him. The judges began speaking. Heidi was the first. She told him she had never seen a child control emotion in a voice the way he did. How he said the courage to tell his own story at such a young age was something adults struggle to do. Sophia said he touched her heart in a way she couldn't explain, and that she felt like she had just watched a star being born right in front of her. But everyone was waiting for one person. Simon. Simon leaned forward, elbows on the table, fingers interlocked. For a moment he didn't speak. He just stared at Michael with a seriousness that caught everyone off guard. Then he said that sometimes God gives a child a gift so rare, so pure, so powerful that it doesn't need perfection. It only needs honesty. And Michael had just given one of the most honest performances he had ever seen on the show. And then he said something that made the entire room erupt. He said that Michael wasn't just performing a song. He was telling the truth. And the truth deserves something special. And with that, Simon reached over and slammed his hand onto the golden buzzer. The moment the golden confetti exploded, Michael's face transformed completely. He gasped, covered his eyes, then looked up as the golden rain fell around him. His mother ran onto the stage, grabbing him, hugging him, lifting him slightly off his feet. They both cried in each other's arms as the crowd screamed and cheered. Even as the confetti fell, Michael kept repeating the same sentence, "I can't believe it. I just can't believe it." But it was real. The dream he whispered to himself in the mirror. The dream he practiced for night after night. The dream he carried silently in his small heart. It had finally come true. And it happened not because he tried to imitate a legend, but because he dared to become himself. Backstage afterward, he held the golden buzzer confetti in his hands like treasure. He spoke softly in interviews, explaining that he just wanted people to feel something. That he didn't want to be famous. He just wanted to be heard. He wanted people to know that even children have stories, and sometimes those stories deserve their own songs. Word of his performance spread across social media within minutes. Clips went viral. Comments poured in. People called him the youngest storyteller of the season. Others said his voice carried old soul depth. Some said he reminded them of the early days of iconic stars who carried emotion like fire. But everyone agreed on one thing. America had just witnessed something truly rare. Michael didn't walk out of the audition as a child who sang. He walked out as a child who connected. A child who opened his heart in front of millions. A child who showed that sometimes the quietest voices make the loudest impact. A child who turned his fears into art and his pain into music. His journey had only begun. And no matter what happened next, one thing was clear. The world had just met a boy whose voice would not be forgotten. Not today, not tomorrow, not ever. And that is the story of how a 9-year-old named Michael Jackson stunned America's Got Talent not by copying a legend, but by becoming one in his own way.